Hi everyone, welcome back to the Selective Preparation Program on Power Mathematical Reasoning. And so today we're going to be going through test 55 and just 10 of the questions that we thought were a little bit more challenging for everyone to do. So, question 1, which involves problem solving, it says that there are 5,100 books divided across 4 libraries. So library 1 has 480 books. However, there are 1,015 more books in library 3 than there are in library 2 and 470 more books than in library 4, right? And so now it says if library 4 has 1,565 books, how many books are there in library 2? So what we can do is we can first actually work out how many books there are in library 3, right? So because it says library 3 has 470 more books than in library 4, we can just do that. We can just say that library 3 has 1,565 plus 470 books, which will give you 2,035 books, right? Okay, and so now it also says here that library 3, right, has 1,015 more books than there are in library 2. Okay, so what we can do, we can just say that library 2 will have 1,015 less books, right, than library 3. So that means library 2 has 2,035 minus 1,015 books, which will give you a final answer of 1,020 books. And so the correct answer here will be B. All right. Okay, so now question 2, this relates to number skills. So it says 4 different numbers are chosen from the numbers 2, 3, 6, 7, and 9. They're then added together. Which of these statements is or are correct? Okay, so the first statement says the total can be a multiple of 11. So right now, if we look to the bottom right here, these are all of the possible different combinations of the sums of those numbers, right? And if we look closely with all of them, we actually realize that none of these numbers here, so 18, 20, 21, 24, and 25, can be a multiple of 11. And so that's why number 1 can't be correct, okay? Now, number 3, we can instantly tell that they are both odd and even numbers, right? Because 21 is an odd number, 20 is an even number, okay? And so that means 3 can also not be correct, okay? And now 2, it says the total cannot be a multiple of 11, okay? And if we look at the combinations below of the sums, we have 18, 20, 21, 24, and 25, right? So that means out of every single combination possible, none of them is actually a multiple of 11, right? And so the only correct statement here is going to be statement 2, and so the answer is C. Ooh, sorry. So now, question 3, interpreting graphs. So the graph below shows the distance from home during a school excursion. Now, which point on the graph represents the time when we stop for lunch? Okay, so if we look at this, right, during the distance for P, right, we actually see that we are getting further and further from home, right? And so that means during that time in P, we're actually still moving, okay? Now, at R, right, at R here, this was the time we see a very sharp, change from the distance from home, right? So right before R, we were getting further and further away from home. But then when we reached point R, what happened is we started to go home, right? So we can safely say that at R, what we did was we actually basically finished our trip, finished our excursion, and we started to go home, right? So we didn't stop for lunch there. And S is obviously just going to be the time where we spent on the bus, right? Let's say trying to go home. Okay, so the only part that's correct will be this little section Q, right? Because at Q, we see a very, very flat line, okay? And so that flat line just means that we are neither moving towards our home, and we're also not moving away from our home, right? So at that point, Q will be basically the time that represents where we stop for lunch, because that's the only time where we weren't moving any certain distance, okay? And so the answer to that question will be B. Now, question 4, 3D geometry. So Tracy needs to turn a large prism into 4 smaller wedges. Okay, so how many wedges can she make? Okay, so for this question, what we can do is we can see that what we can do, we can actually just draw the wedge again onto this 3D shape, right? So now we draw something like this, okay? And now this gives us a perfect box, right? So we get 3 centimeters here, normally, and obviously this is gonna be 2 centimeters here, and here is also going to be 2 centimeters, right? Because it's just going to have the same measurements as the original wedge, right? So now we know that each one of these little boxes is going to be worth 2 wedges, right? So we can just see how many of these little boxes we can actually fit inside this bigger prism, okay? And so if we look at this measurement here, so for the height, the one box is 2 centimeters, so that means we know that we can fit 2 boxes upwards like that. Right, and if you look at the width, okay, so the width is 3 centimeters. That means we know we can fit 3 boxes on the length side, okay. And so if we look at the length, okay, it's 2 centimeters. That means we know for here we can fit 5 of those boxes over there, right? So what we can do, we can just do 2 times 3 times 5, okay. And so that will give us 2 times 3 is going to be 6. 6 times 5 is going to be 30. Okay, but remember this is 30 boxes, right? 30 of these little boxes, right? So that means we must times it by 2, right? We must times by 2, and so this means that we can make 60 wedges, all right? Okay, so the answer to this question will be C. Now, question 5, so this is to do with percentages, right? So after the game, the big Bobcats scored 30% of their total points so far in the soccer season against the large lizards. During the game, the large lizards scored 8 goals and both teams combined for a scoring total of 23 points. So how many points did the big Bobcats score throughout their season? Okay. So we know that large lizards, right, scored 8 out of those 23 goals, right? So each goal is worth 1 point, okay? And so that means in that game, the big Bobcats actually scored 15 goals, right? So 15 goals, okay? And so this 15 goals right here is 30% of total, right? Of the total amount of goals big Bobcats have actually scored up until now throughout the season, right? So what we can do, we realize that 10%, right, of the amount of goals big Bobcats have actually scored is actually equal to 5 goals. Okay, and so we can just do 5 times 10, right, to get the 100%, right, to get everything that they've scored throughout the season, and that will just give us 50 goals. Okay, and so the answer is going to be B. All right. Okay, next question. So interpreting data and percentages. So a survey was conducted online to find out which city people like to go into, and there were only 5 options. The results are shown below in the pictograph. Okay, so one of these smiley faces or one of these faces represents 1,000 people. Okay, so what percentage of the total people need to change their vote to Sydney? So that 50% of participants voted for Sydney. Okay. So right now what we can do, we actually need to figure out how many people there are in total, right? And so if we look at this, right, Beijing, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 faces, right? So that's just 5,500 people voted for this guy, for Beijing. New York, that will be 6,500 because we see there's 6 faces and 1/2 of a face. Queenstown, we see 3 faces and 1/4 of a face, so 1/4 of 1,000 is going to be 250, right? So we add that up, that'll be 3,250. Sydney, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 and 1/4, so that'll be 8,250. And then finally for Tokyo, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 1/2, so that'll be 6,500. Okay. So if we were to add all of these up, the total amount, okay, total amount of people is actually equal to 30,000. Okay, now, what we realize is we want to figure out what percentage of is already voting for Sydney, right? So the percentage of people voting for Sydney, so I'll say Sydney percent is actually just going to be equal to 8,250 divided by 30,000, right? Times by 100, and that will give us 27.5%, right? And so that means in order to have Sydney make up of 50% of the participants, right? We need to basically get 50% minus 27.5%, right? 5% to give us 22.5%, which is the total amount of percentage of people that needs to vote or change their vote to Sydney, so that 50% of the participants will be voting for Sydney. And so the answer to this question will be C. Okay. Now, question 7, lengths and 2D geometry. So, 3 steel rods of equal length are placed next to each other in a manner shown below. Okay, so what is the length of a single steel rod? Okay, so for this type of question is actually pretty confusing, because what you see is that there are a lot of overlaps, right? So we see here, this is an overlap there, there's an overlap here, right? But what we can also think about is, that means the spots that didn't have any overlaps, like these spots, right? That is actually equal to 238. So what we can do, we can just add on the length of overlap to make the total length of those 3 rods together, right? So what we can do, we just do 238 plus 33 plus 11, okay? And so that will give us 282, right? Okay? And so with 282, we're going to divide this by 3. So this 282 here is actually going to be the total length of these 3 rods added together without any overlap, okay? So with no overlap, if we were to just place them next to each other, the rods will equal to 282, and this is because we added on the lengths of overlap, which were basically excluded from the 238 centimeter measurement from before, okay? So now what we do 282 divided by 3, and that will give us 94 centimeters for a single steel rod. Okay, so the answer to this question is E. Okay, now question 8. So some numerical reasoning. The numbers 9 and 54 have the highest common factor 9 and lowest common multiple 54. So a second pair of numbers also has highest common factor 9 and lowest common multiple 54. Okay, so what is the sum of the pair of numbers? Okay, so what we can think about here is we know that the second pair of numbers has the highest common factor of 9. So that means we just have to find out, numbers that have a factor of 9, right? So we have numbers starting with 9. We have 18, 27, and etc., right? Now, we also have the lowest common multiple of 54. So what factors can actually become 54? So 54 have the factors of obviously 1 and 54, 6 and 9, but we also have 3, 18, and 2 and 27, right? So those are the factors. So these are factors of 54, okay? And so what we see here is the only numbers here that actually line up is 18, 27, right? These two numbers, okay? So that means we know that these numbers must be the second pair, okay? So we just do 18 plus 27, okay, which gives us 45, okay? And so the answer to this question is C. All right. Now, question 9, so some numerical reasoning. So in a game, I collected stars and boxes. I get points every time I collect a star, and the number of points for stars is always the same. So I get fewer points when I collect boxes, and the points it's worth are always the same as well. So if I collected 2 stars and 8 boxes, I get 24 points. If I collected 1 star and 16 boxes, I get 36 points. So how many points do I get if I collect 4 stars and 5 boxes? Okay. All right, so for this question, what we can think about is We have to work out how much each star in each box is worth. Okay, so in this case, what we can do 16 boxes, okay, minus 8 boxes, plus, obviously there's 1 star, minus 2 stars, right? And so what we realize, what we get with this is actually we just get 36 minus 24, right? And so that gives us 12. And so that means 8 boxes, and if we take away 1 star, okay, because 1 star take away 2 stars is just negative 1 star, right? It's like minus 1 star, we get 12, okay? And so that means 8 boxes, right, is actually just going to be equal to 12 plus 1 star, okay? Right? Okay, so anyways, what we see here is that we have 8 boxes equal to 12 plus 1 star, right? So that means in this equation we see right here, we actually get 12 plus 3 stars, okay, equals to 24. So that means 3 stars is equal to 12, and so 1 star is going to be 4, right? So since we found out what 1 star is, we can just figure out how much 8 boxes are. So, 8 boxes must equal to 16 then, because 12 plus 4 is 16. So that means 1 box is equal to 2. Alright, so we can just do 4 times 4, 4 stars. Alright, so this is just going to be 16. 5 times 2, this is 10. And so if we add these two together, that gives us 26. And that's our final answer for B. Alright? Now, question 10, a pattern of boxes is drawn on a grid. So the coordinates for box 1 is B2, coordinates for box 2 is C2, and so on, right? Okay, so if we look at the little pattern, we see that the pattern follows like 1, 2, and it goes up by 1 row, 3, and 4, right? But if we were to look more closely, right, if we look at the row that starts with 4, okay, 4 is on 4, okay, and then we skip 1, 2, 3 rows, yeah? And that's now a box 8. 1, 2, 3. Again, that's box 12, right? So what we actually see is that means that the pattern will move up 9 rows every 12 boxes, right? But since it starts from this second row, okay, box 24 will actually be at the row of row 19, okay? Okay, now, so since it's every 12 boxes will move up by 9 rows, what we realize is that box 36 will actually be at row 28, okay? Yeah? So now that means box 37 will be at B29 because it has to be a new start of a pattern because it repeats, right? And that means box 38 will be 1 box to the right of that, okay? And so that means box 38 must be C29. And so the answer to this question is A. All right? Okay? And so yeah, those are all the questions that we thought was a little bit harder for test 55. So just some key points from this unit. For a few of these questions, we really have to make sure we know what information is being provided to you, because especially for the stars and boxes, those had a lot of different manipulations we had to do with some of the equations we wrote out. And then for the other ones, like interpreting graphs and things like that, so those were also quite difficult as well if you didn't make quite a distinct list. So yeah, okay. But yeah, have a good day, everyone, and thank you very much.